You're about to hear Bill McKibben speaking via webcam at the UCSC Kresge Town Hall on February 26, 2015. The event was hosted by the UCSC Kresge Common Ground Center, Education for a Just and Sustainable World. For more information, visit kresge.ucsc.edu/common ground.
Please join me in welcoming Bill McKibben.
There's plenty of reason to worry. We've managed to build a world that is that's not working as well as it used to. And the reason it's not working as well as it used to is because we put too much carbon into the atmosphere. Burning coal and oil and gas has raised the temperature of the earth. Now, I wrote the first book about all this 26 years ago, i.e. before you were born. And then, 26 years ago, we didn't know how fast all this was going to play out. It's played out a lot faster than we had feared. The damage has come with enormous speed. We've already lost much of the summer sea ice in the Arctic. The oceans are already about 30% more acidic than they were when I was born. We're seeing enormous change. The good news is we're also finally seeing the emergence of a movement to do something about this. For a long time, there was no movement, and I think the reason was that everybody assumed that, faced with the biggest problem the world has ever faced, that our leaders would do something about it. But our leaders didn't do anything about it. And the reason they didn't do anything about it is because they were so dominated by the fossil fuel industry, the richest industry that the world has ever known. So let me give you just one small example of one project, this Keystone pipeline down out of the tar sands of Canada. As some of you know, we've been fighting this for a long time. A lot of us have been to jail. We've written more public comments than on any infrastructure project in U.S. history, emailed more senators in a day than any other issue that there's ever been, so on and so forth. But this is absurd. We should not have to be working like that because it's a terrible, stupid project. It's the dirtiest oil on earth, and the idea that we would put it in a pipe and send it across the Oglala Aquifer in order to take it to the Gulf Coast and refine it into diesel and ship it overseas is crazy. It's crazy because, as Nature magazine pointed out in a major study last month, if we were serious about doing anything about climate change, we'd have to leave all that oil in the ground up there. The reason that we're not has everything to do with the fact that the biggest leaseholder in the tar sands of Canada are the two Koch brothers. And taken together, those two Koch brothers are the richest person on the planet. And they've announced already that they'll spend $900 million on the next presidential election. That's more than the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And they're just a party of two, you know. But their outsized influence and the outsized influence of Exxon and Chevron and Shell and on and on and on, that's been enough to keep anything from happening. Some years ago, a few of us, really myself and 7 undergraduates here at Middlebury College, where I teach, formed 350.org because we understood that we were going to have to match that money power with people power. And so we started building this global climate movement. The name 350 refers to the safe amount of carbon in the atmosphere, 350 parts per million, a number sadly we're already well past. But it was also chosen because we wanted a number, not a name. We wanted to be able to work around the world, and Arabic numerals translate easily across those linguistic boundaries, you know. And I think our theory was sound because so far we've been able to hold about 20,000 rallies and demonstrations in every country on Earth except North Korea. And that's been a remarkable thing to get to be a part of. We've enjoyed it immensely. The trouble is we don't have 50, 60 years for kind of slow, patient education to take its course. So along with using all that huge global network to try and spread the word about what's going on with climate change, we've also had to use it to try and confront the fossil fuel industry. And sometimes that means standing up to bad projects like Keystone. So right now, at the moment, we're fighting fracking in California. Jerry Brown has got to stop the oil industry from pushing hundreds of millions of gallons of water, good, clean water, into oil wells in order to make them produce more oil. It is the stupidest idea that there ever was. And Jerry Brown could end it and do it right away. Just like people in New York ended fracking there last fall. Just like in the last few weeks, people in Wales and Scotland have voted to end fracking. Just like yesterday, Tasmania decided it would no longer allow fracking. Time for California to join that movement. But we're also on the Pacific Northwest fighting big coal ports. In Australia, we're fighting plans for the biggest coal mine on Earth. Stuff like that all over the world. All important. But you know what? If all we did was play defense against bad projects like that, we would eventually lose. You can't just play defense. And so we're also trying hard to make sure that we're playing offense too. And the name of that offense is divestment. This is this fight to make sure that our institutions start selling off their stock in coal and gas and oil companies. Not because we can bankrupt Exxon, we can't by doing this, but we can begin to politically bankrupt them, to intellectually and morally bankrupt them, to say decent people no longer want to have anything to do with companies like this because, as scientists have shown us in the last couple of years, these guys have in their reserves 5 times as much carbon as scientists say would be safe to burn. If they carry out their business plan, the planet tanks. That's why we need divestment. And the good news is it's starting to happen. A study from Oxford last year said this was the fastest growing such campaign ever. Stanford has begun the process of divesting. San Francisco State, Humboldt State, Chico, the ends of foothills, and those are just places in California. All over the world this is happening, from Sydney to Glasgow to you name it. Maybe the most impressive moment of the whole thing came last September. It was the same day as we held a huge climate march across New York City with 400,000 people marching through the streets, the biggest demonstration about anything in this country for quite a while, a demonstration led by indigenous people who've been at the forefront of this fight, and by people from frontline communities that have to deal with this filthy industry. People like the ones in Richmond, California, or Torrance, or the kind of places that have seen refinery explosions and fires and things. At any rate, that night after that march, uptown in New York, representatives of the Rockefeller family announced that they were divesting from fossil fuel. Now, those of you who are historians know why that's a big deal. The Rockefeller family was the first family of fossil fuel. John D. Rockefeller was the first big oil fortune. If they've decided that it's immoral and financially unwise to be invested in this stuff, then why is your university divested in it? Why is anybody investing in it? I think this will be a big year. The last time that there was a movement like this, it was around apartheid in South Africa. And when Nelson Mandela got out of prison, the first place he went was to California. And he went there specifically to thank students at the UC system who had forced the divestment of $3 billion worth of stock tied to that racist government in South Africa. And Mandela said, "We liberated ourselves, but we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you." We need that kind of solidarity now more than ever. Mandela's great accomplice in that work, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's the one who really put out this call for divestment from fossil fuel all over the world. And so I'm very glad that there are people there working on all of this. I'm glad that you guys are working on so many parts of this, not just the fight against, but the fight for what needs to come. Just like we need a fossil freeze, we need a solar thaw. We need to be generating every ounce of solar power that we can. We need to be putting up solar panels as fast as is humanly possible. We know that we can do this. In Germany last summer, there were days when the Germans generated 80% of their power from solar panels. Germany gets as much sun on average as Alaska. I think California is beginning to build out its solar capacity, but California could be powering the entire nation from solar panels. At the very least, it could be powering California. And so we need those of you who are engineers and things to be hard at work in making that happen as fast as is possible. That solar panels have dropped in price 90% in the last 6 years is one of the most hopeful statistics I know, because it makes it possible to see where we might be going. I don't want to belabor all this. I know you guys know most of this, and I wish that I could tell you for sure that if we did all the right things, we were going to win. I'm not sure we are going to win. The fossil fuel industry is very strong. More to the point, the momentum of physics is very strong. We've waited a long time to get started, and so lots of bad things have already happened, and more bad things will happen. I don't know how we're going to change in time to prevent drought cycles from overtaking California and things. But I do know that we can keep things from getting entirely out of control, only if we act now. And I know that there are people all over the world in rooms like the one you're in right now figuring out how to take action. Action. Good thing to change your light bulbs, but a completely insufficient thing too, because this problem is structural and systemic. It's rooted in the power of the fossil fuel industry to dominate our political life, and unless we can break that power, then we will lose. This is, more than anything else, a fight of self-interest for you guys, because you're going to come into the primes of your careers right at the moment when climate change is wreaking its worst havoc. I'll be dead by then. I've just gotten to see the beginning of this trouble, but you're going to see all of it unless we're able to slow it down. So practical, but also a moral problem, because there's never been anything as unjust as what we're doing with the climate. The people and places on Earth that have done the least to cause the problem are feeling the results first. And so it is crucial that we stand up and stand up quickly in the name of survival, in the name of justice, really in the name of reining in the radicals who run the oil companies around the earth. They are the people who are altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere, and with it raising the temperature of the one planet that we have. There have never been radicals like this on our planet, so it's up to all the rest of us to stand up to them and check that radicalism, stop it before it can overtake us all. So thank you guys for being a part of this, and I look forward to standing with you shoulder to shoulder in as many fights as you're willing to get into. Thank you all, and if you got questions, I'll try to make some attempt at answering them.
So we sent out for questions this week, and I'm just going to kind of go down the list. The first is, what is one reasonable lifestyle change that will make the most impact toward ending fossil fuel use?
Well, I mean, I know the question, I know the kind of answers you want, and I think you know most of these answers too. You should eat lower on the food chain. You know, you should bike and walk whenever you can instead of riding a car. But I got to say, the lifestyle change that would make the most difference was if you changed your lifestyle to become a bit more of an activist. That's what it's going to take, is organizing. I've changed all the light bulbs in my house twice, the compact fluorescents and then the LEDs, and I'll change them again when they invent something else. but I don't try to fool myself that that or my solar panels or my electric car are really going to solve this problem. As I said before, it's structural, it's systemic. That's how we'll deal with it if we ever deal with it.
So you spoke of some of the positive alternatives like solar panels. What other things that are innovative and inspiring are you seeing out in the world in response to the damage of fossil fuels?
Sure, good question. We see solar power in all its forms, on your rooftop, out in the desert. We see wind power, small local wind power, big turbines doing their thing. We're beginning to see different kinds of unconventional renewable power. People are beginning the world's first commercial wave power generator went online this week. We're seeing people learn how to use every local thing that they have at hand to generate energy. Here in Vermont, where we have a huge dairy industry, the methane coming out of cow manure is becoming a useful source of energy. Middlebury College, where I hang out, will soon be getting much of its electricity from a dairy farm down the road. We see people getting incredibly good at making things efficiently. So now we can insulate a house to make sure that it doesn't need much in the way of air conditioning or heating. I don't mean build a new, fancy, expensive house. I mean take an old, pretty crappy house and fix it up so that it uses less energy, spends less money, and produces virtually no carbon going forward. All these things are out there. All these things are possible. The only question is why we're not going to them faster than we are. And the answer to that lies, as I say, with the financial might of the fossil fuel industry. All around America, utilities are fighting to keep from putting solar panels on people's roofs, trying to charge them more if they want to put them up. That kind of completely perverse incentive keeps us from getting done what needs to be done. But even with all those efforts, the beauty and power of renewable energy keeps poking its way through. We were just talking today with friends, organizers in India, who were saying that India, California last week, I think, inaugurated the largest solar array on Earth. And in India, there'll be one half again as big, up and running by next spring. That's how fast you can build these things. It's quite amazing to see it all happen.
So you said it's a structural, systemic issue pointing to the fossil fuel industry, but isn't it deeper than that? For example, a capitalist system that is based on unlimited economic growth, and how do we address that?
Well, I've written a lot about economic growth. You can read a book of mine called Deep Economy that tries to get at some of these things. And I'd also recommend the good new book by my dear friend Naomi Klein, a book called This Is Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. But I don't actually think that we're on the verge of changing our whole economic system overnight, not in time to deal with the problem that we face. I do think that it's possible that if we change our energy system, that'll do a lot to undermine the gross inequalities of power that mark our current world. That is to say, if we have sun and wind everywhere, then we don't need the Koch brothers anymore. We don't have to write them a check every month for our oil and gas. They know that. That's why they want to spend $900 million on the next election. We know that, and that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Another one here. You mentioned we might not win the game. What does losing look like? Is this an emergency? Are we heading toward human extinction?
Well, I hope not, and I doubt it. I think, the human race is likely to survive in one form or another. But if we allow the temperature of the planet to go up 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, 8 or 9 degrees Fahrenheit this century, which is what we're currently on a trajectory for, we clearly can't have civilizations like the ones we're used to at the moment. Agronomists at Stanford and University of Washington put out a study a couple of years ago saying, from this point on, we can expect each degree increase in global average temperature to cut grain yields on this planet about 10%. So if you raise the temperature 3 degrees, you cut the number of grain calories by 30%. You all know enough about the world to imagine what kind of world that is and how well that will work. Not well at all.
Yes. What, in your perspective, is the best media to bridge the gap between the scientific world and communities that rely on fossil fuels for employment?
Say this one more time.
What's the best media to bridge the gap between the scientific world and communities that rely on fossil fuels for employment?
Well, I mean, it's a very good question. The truth is that the number of people employed in the fossil fuel industry keeps going down and down and down. There are now far more people making a living off solar energy in America than off coal. Because coal is a huge automated industry. Solar, you have to get people up on ladders on top of roofs. But there's no denying the fact that there are people who will be out of work as we make this switch. There always are when we make switches. Our job is to make sure that that is a just transition, that those people are, if they're young enough, retrained, do something else, but at any rate, made whole, protected against that kind of change. But we can't keep digging up coal simply because it's good for coal miners. We have to think about what's good for this planet for millennia to come.
Would you agree that direct, ongoing confrontation is necessary to now motivate Obama and all the Congress to fully recognize reality about human fossil fuel pollution and the polluters?
I think direct, ongoing confrontation is a good idea. That's why we organized the largest civil disobedience action about anything in 30 years. Chained ourselves to Obama's gate. And I think it was useful. I think civil disobedience is an important tool in the activist toolkit. Like any tool, you don't want to use it all the time, because if you do, it will get dull, literally and metaphorically. So it's important to use all the other tools as well. But when the time comes, nonviolent direct action is an important idea with real power.
How do you feel about geoengineering, particularly solar radiation management to combat warming caused by climate change?
I think it's basically insane. The idea that having filled the atmosphere with carbon and to heat the planet, we'll now want to fill it with sulfur in order to cool the planet down is nuts, because we have another option. The option is to put as many solar panels up as we need around the planet and start producing energy cleanly, at which point forests and oceans will soak up that carbon and we'll be back to 350 parts per million. One of the reasons that solar radiation management, other kinds of geoengineering, are so dumb is because even if they were able to keep the temperature of the planet from getting entirely out of control, and there's no real reason to think that they would, but even if they could, they do absolutely nothing about the twin problem that comes with this, the acidification of our oceans as they absorb carbon from the atmosphere. And you there on the Pacific coast have a strong sense of what's going on as oceans start to change. Already the oceans are 30% more acidic. If we keep pouring carbon into the atmosphere, that will just keep getting worse. It's already at the point where small creatures at the bottom of the marine food chain are having a hard time reproducing. We live on an ocean planet. That's a really dumb thing to be doing.
You talk often of this leaderless climate movement. What practices or messaging have you found useful in cultivating an engaged citizenry when the democratic process seems at times so corrupt?
Well, we've just always relied on telling the truth. When we started 350.org, people said, well, that's much too complicated, no one will ever understand it, whatever. And we were like, no, people understand it. It's a number. It's like now you're above that number, and that's bad. Everybody gets that. And indeed, people have been able to all over the world, even people who are theoretically illiterate and things. And people said, oh, it'd be too depressing anyway, since we're already past 350. And I didn't think so. I mean, I think it's like, well, you guys are too young for this, really, but when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, your cholesterol is too high, and you're in that zone where people have heart attacks, you might already have a slight stroke or something. that's the point at which people start taking action.
So just a few more here, Bill. What do you think of more targeted divestments or environmental social governance screens, such as the Norwegian Government Pension Fund, to divest of 114 coal companies, or like is being suggested and done here at the UC, the pursuit of ESG investing in lieu of divestment?
I think that most of the efforts at, quote, engagement, unquote, with the fossil fuel industry are just greenwashing cover to avoid having to divest. There are certainly industries that you can engage with, you know. If Apple is paying its Chinese workers too little to make an iPhone, then we can put pressure on Apple and they will raise the wages and the price of an iPhone will go up $1 and everyone will be happy. The problem here is that there's not as if there is a flaw in Exxon's business plan. The flaw is Exxon's business plan. They completely want to go out and find more hydrocarbons. They spend $100 million a day doing that, dig them up and burn them, and then go find some more. And they have said over and over again that that's what they intend to do. There's no way to talk them out of it. This is a fight. And the day will come when people stop trying to avoid taking them on and realize that taking them on is what we need to do.
So what all do you imagine that we might need to give up or significantly cut back on, like, for example, air travel, anything frivolous or business?
I think air travel is the thing that's going to be hard to imagine in a world that takes carbon really seriously. I don't think we're going to reach a point anytime soon when there's a ecologically sound way to just hop on an airplane at the drop of a hat and go all over just because you want to change the scenery. The good news is that we live in a world with a new tool, new to me, you've had all your lives, the internet, that allow us to be in contact and communion with people all over the world just by moving the mouse, you know. So I think that we're better positioned than people in other eras for doing with a little bit less air travel. I think a lot of other things will be much better in the world that we're coming to. I think that inherently a world that uses sun and wind is a more local world than the one we've got at the moment. And I think just like local food, we'll find pleasures in relying on each other, on our neighbors for some of the most important things around us, our electrons. So I actually think we're going to be building a more democratic, interesting planet than the one we live on now. The only thing I worry about is that the damage from climate change will just overwhelm it before it can happen.
And one last question here. Biologists are concerned about these mega solar installations interfering with habitats and ecosystems. Can you speak to trading one resource, for example, Earth ecosystem habitats, for renewable energy sources?
Sure. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have anything. We just would, you know, draw our power straight out of the air or something, and there'd be no. But we're not in a perfect world, and we are in fact in a huge emergency. And the biologists tell us that if we don't get that emergency, the heating of the planet, under control, then we will see the extinction of half the species on this planet before the century is out. So it is penny wise and pound foolish to hold up the rapid expansion of solar power out of concern for, say, the desert tortoise. It's smart to try and cite things wisely, but not to slow down or prevent the construction of solar power stuff, because the ultimate survival of the desert tortoise and everything else depends on a planet where the temperature is under some kind of control. So we've got to be mature enough to be willing to, I mean, where I live in Vermont, it's not people complaining or worrying about desert tortoise, people saying, I don't want to look at windmills up on the mountaintop. You know what? We're going to have to learn to deal with some of that. And we're going to have to learn to deal with it fast, because if we don't, then there'll still be a mountain there, but it won't have the nice Vermont forest on it, and there'll still be a desert ecosystem there, but it won't have the desert tortoise or much of anything else in it, because it'll be too damn hot and dry even for the tortoise.